Hello and welcome to part 3 in our 5-part series on healing, health, and wholeness, gospel style, the practical application of the principles demonstrated by Jesus in the Gospels. My name is Reverend Matthew E. Long. I'm a Peace Unity Network. You can find information about this class and about other things we are doing at peaceunity.net, peaceunity.net, and the outlines for this course and the videos under the library tab, classes, healing, health, and wholeness. So hopefully you've already been part of the class as we've been doing it online in Zoom, or you've been watched the first 2 videos, but I'll do a quick summary here. And you've got the worksheets with you. The first session, we talked about faith healing. Started with Jesus' formula for healing and the metaphysical basis for health. And I've introduced the threefold nature of being, or the 3 phases of being, most commonly known as spirit, mind, and body. Mind, body, spirit. And the concept of faith healing. And the 3 aspects of the faith healing: belief, willingness, and thanksgiving. That our belief focuses our faith, that our willingness empowers our faith, and gratitude makes it real, brings it into realization. And last week I introduced the 4 functions of consciousness. Now these are frameworks for understanding the absolute in relative terms, ways of understanding how the infinite, unlimited, eternal existence of God, that which is beyond conception, how that comes into manifestation, how that presses out or expresses into our world. And the 4 functions of consciousness are the intuition, the thinking, feeling, and the sensing natures or functions of consciousness. And we can think of our intuition and our sensing as our inputs, and that the thinking and feeling are how we process that information. Now, the proper functioning of our consciousness is that through our intuitions, we make contact with the divine mind and bring forth divine ideas into our mind, that we have thoughts and we bring those into ideas for expression, and that we empower those ideas with our feelings, and then we press them out into existence. So we have this coming from above, thinking, feeling, sensing, expressing, if you will. Now, what happens is most of us get caught up in what I call this material world do loop, if you will, the lower triangle. Now, we see something, we have a feeling about it, we have an emotion, we think, oh, gee, I ought to have it, and then we do it, right? We get caught up in this sensing, feeling, thinking, do, this lower do loop triangle, if you will. And that's what causes all the problems. And that brings us into our first story. We're looking at the stories of healing in the Gospels, and the first one we're looking at today is the man at the pool of Bethsaida. It's more commonly known as Bethesda. That's the King James version interpretation of the word Bethsaida. And the story begins in the Gospel according to John, chapter 5, verse 2. And in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethsaida, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there, had been there for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, knew he had been there long, he asked him, "Do you want to be made well?" And the man, came up with this excuse. I don't have nobody to take me down to the well when the water is stirred up. Jesus ends up saying, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." And of course, it was on the Sabbath, which got him into trouble. Let's start at the beginning here. Jerusalem. Salam is peace. Jeru means habitation of. So in a conscious awareness of peace. So he's bringing with him, going into a conscious awareness of peace, and by the sheep gate, sheep are innocent, guileless, humble, if you will. Innocent, and a gate is an opening, a way to realize this innocence, to realize this. So he's entering through the gate into Jerusalem, in Hebrew, which is called Beth. Cesar, Beth is house of mercy. Cesar, Beth is house of, like the word Beth El means house of God, El being God. And then it has 5 porches, 5 porticos. 5 is symbolic of our sense consciousness, thinking, feeling. I'm sorry, I got off on the wrong one. That we see, taste, touch, and smell. See, hear, taste, touch, and smell. All those 5 sense consciousnesses. And we have 5 external extremities from our body, our heads, our arms, our legs. We have 5 holes in our head, our ears, our nose, our mouth. It's sense consciousness. And it's where material medicine is being practiced, on these 4 or 5 porches. The sick come, and the people who are healers come, and they practice their craft. And there's one man who had been there for 38 years, and that's a long time to be hanging out there. There's a lot of symbology built into these stories, and we're going to tear this one apart a little bit more than the others today. But 38, why 38? Well, 40, it's just a little short of 40. 40 symbolizes the period of the time it takes, how long it takes to get to where you need to go to this new level of consciousness. If we think of Jesus being in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights before he's tempted of the devil, that Elijah was in the cave for 40 days and 40 nights before he heard the still small voice, that Moses' life was divided into 3 periods of 40 years. 40 years in the Pharaoh's house, 40 years in Jethro's house, and 40 years leading the people to the promised land through the wilderness. 40 is the time it takes. Now, why is 38 and why not 39? Well, 39, 3 plus 9 is 12. 12 is spiritual completion. We understand the spiritual faculties. There's the 12 tribes of Israel. There's the 12 apostles. There's the 24 elders. The 12 comes up over and over in the New Testament. It symbolizes that those spiritual faculties, if you will, within us. Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, called them 12 powers of man, although he talked to them about faculties of spirit and faculties of mind much more often. The book's called 12 Powers of Man. So he wasn't ready. It had not completed his time yet. But Jesus asked him, do you want to be made well? Are you willing? And he comes up with this excuse. But somewhere there is instead of just saying, okay, you're healed, he says, stand up and take your mat and walk. There had to be a level of willingness. There had to be a level of him actually taking an action. And that's for all of us to realize that it's up to us to take an action, whether it is looking at our diet and exercise, whether it's finding whatever it is, technique that we need to participate in. We need also to be involved in the mental level, that our thinking precedes our expression. The thoughts precede the outer expression. And are we looking towards the intuition, or are we looking towards the outer sense consciousness for our healing? Beth Cesar, the 5 porches, are talking about sense consciousness, and he's bringing a whole new level. Jesus is bringing a whole new level of understanding of healing, health, and wholeness. The second story is that of the Centurion's servant. And he goes back to Capernaum. A Centurion came to him. This is in Matthew. The stories in Matthew and Luke, and they're a little bit different. I'll get into that in a moment. Here, Jesus says, I'll come to him and cure him. And the centurion says, Lord, I'm not worthy. But he says that if you just speak the word, my servant will be healed. And Jesus says, I tell you, no one in Israel have I found such faith. This is pretty significant. And he says, let it be done to you according to your faith. We talked about Capernaum before in our first lesson, I believe it was. Capernaum, energy of life, a power center in consciousness, inner conviction, the abiding compassion and restoring power of being. So he's in that consciousness, Capernaum consciousness. A centurion, is a leader of 100 men. That's why he's called a centurion, and is an expression of the will. Now, Charles Fillmore, in his book, in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, which I talked about a little bit last week, talks about it. It says, the will whose servant the body is sick. Until man blends his will with the divine will, he is grievously tormented in many ways. Here the will recognizes and calls upon the higher law of the Christ. Now the Christ is within each one of us. Christ in you, the hope of glory. That we are made in the image after the likeness of God. That God is spirit. And we are inherently spiritual. And the spirit within us, that spirit of God, that expression of God, that perfect pattern and potential for being, we call the Christ within. So recognizing calls upon the higher law of the Christ and asks that the Christ word may go forth with the same imperative command that it is in the habit of exercising its control of the organism. Even the Christ is unprepared for this evidence of faith in its naked word, but quickened to action by the zealous will, the word of truth goes forth and the body is made whole. So we're calling forth the Christ within, calling forth that divine pattern for wholeness. That we have that perfect pattern and potential for, I use that word pattern very, very consciously and very deliberately, that Christ pattern is within us. It doesn't matter what we've done to our bodies, what we've done to us, to ourselves, that pattern and potential still exists within us, and we can call forth that awareness. And that's the faith that we're looking for, that not even Israel, spiritual consciousness, our consciousness of spirit, that no one, so he hasn't found those divine ideas expressing in the people, and he found it in a centurion, which is a Roman, which is not a Jew, which is not one of those divine ideas in spiritual consciousness normally considered, but a new and a higher law, if you will. Now, what's interesting to me in the Luke version is that not only did the centurion ask for healing for his servant, but the centurion sent friends to meet Jesus, and the friends asked for healing on a part of the centurion for his slave. So we not only have an absent healing, but we have an absent healing times two. So it's like when we call Silent Unity, and Silent Unity is Unity's worldwide prayer ministry, and we ask for healing for another person, that we are participating in that healing experience, and that all it takes is a willingness to be part of that healing experience. The next story we're talking about is the widow's deceased son, and it talks about how soon afterwards he went to a town called Nain. And Nain literally means proper or suitable, and symbolizes man's proper and suitable consciousness, or dwelling place and expression of life, truth and substance, recognizing and knowing that quickening of health and wholeness. It represents a positive state of mind, if you will. It's proper and suitable. It's positive state of mind versus the negative. Now, the son was deceased. That's a negative condition. We have a lot of things that have died within us that can be brought back to life just by speaking the word. They tell him he's dead. He says, do not weep. And he says, young man, I say to you, rise. Young man, that youthful energy within us that can be resurrected. We can resurrect that healing, harmonizing, prospering energy within us that has died back, that somehow feels like it no longer exists. The guidance and direction that we may have experienced in earlier years, that zest for life and for living, has died within us. And so we can call that forth. The Christ within calls forth that divine life. And it goes on to say that when the dead man sat up and began to speak, and fear seized all of them, and they glorified God. Now, fear in this sense is the ancient word fear, which literally means awe and respect. Awe and respect. It doesn't mean to be afraid. Why should they be afraid of him? I don't know. Fear, awe, and respect. And it goes on to say that God has looked favorable on his people and has the word spread throughout Judea. Now, Judea comes from Judah, one of the 12 sons of Israel, 12 sons of Jacob, 12 tribes of Israel. And Judah literally means praise and thanksgiving. So this is a praise consciousness, and whatever we praise, we lift up. Again, we're talking about lifting up our thoughts, lifting up those ideas that we have in our mind, that we have set aside to eliminate the negative and accelerate the positive, if you will, to quote an old favorite song of mine. The next story we're talking about is the demonics at Gadara, or the Gadarenes or Gazarenes. And this story is in all three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And they're a little different in each one. In Matthew, there's two demonics that were in the tombs. And Jesus casts them into the swine, and the swine run into the lake. And then the people come out and say, hey, get out of here. We don't want you killing our pigs, the swine. Now, these, of course, were not Jewish people, because Jews don't eat swine. They're impure, unclean animals, and they wouldn't have anything to do with the pigs. Remember the story of the wayward son, or who takes his inheritance and runs off, and then comes back, and he ends up feeding the swine. And that's about as low as you can get for a Jewish person. And then he finally comes back, comes to himself, comes to a recognition of God within. And so he's in the tombs, which is, nothing grows in the dark. It's a place of death. It's a place of negation, if you will. Two demonics. Of course, demonics we talked about a little bit last week. Error consciousness, separation consciousness, adverse states of mind, of consciousness. And that the swine are sensuous, impure thoughts. So we have a two-stage healing happening here, right? He takes them out of the demonics, puts them into the swine run in, and they are meet their demise, and the demons are gone. So we have a temporary refuge for healing. And often our healing is in two stages. I talked about Myrtle Fillmore. She recognized her healing immediately, but it took 2 years for her body and the doctors to confirm that she was healed. So persist. It's persistence. It's about persistence. Can keep on keeping on. Now in Mark and Luke, it's only one man, and that man has a name. My name is Legion, for we are many. And if you think about it, the negativity, the dark side, is incredibly vast. There's so many different ways that we can get caught up in negative thinking. But positive thinking is one. It's unity. It's oneness. It's non-duality. Do you talk about my Buddhist friends? Non-dual. That there is only one presence and one power, and being focused on the one. So if we're caught up in mixed thinking, then we're caught up in error consciousness. But when we recognize the one presence and the one power in our minds and in our bodies, then we are caught up, then we are involved in spiritual awareness, in the practical application of the principle of God. There's so much stuff in these stories to get to, but I'm trying to keep this down to 20 minutes, and we've got two more stories that wrap up around each other. We have the woman with a hemorrhage. These are all in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And inserted into the story of Jairus' daughter. So let's take it Mark chapter 5, Jesus is going, Jairus comes to him. Jairus represents enlightenment. Jairus, Jah, the God is, I am, Yah, is enlightenment, spiritually illumined, and represents spiritually illumination, a radiating center of light, if you will, and the daughter of this illumination. There's a spiritual relationship, the daughter, which is a feminine expression, comes to him and asks him to come heal his daughter, but in the midst of going there, a woman comes forward, a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. It says hemorrhaging, but we know that he's bleeding. Came up to him, touched the fringe of his cloak, and she says, if I but touch his clothes, I will be made well. And Jesus is aware that the power came from him. And his disciples says, how do you know somebody? Because there's so many people. So we have, and she'd been sick for 12 years. So get back again, 12, spiritual completion. It was time for her to experience that healing. And she participated by, what's the cloak? The cloak is that outer covering. So we have this spiritual awareness coming into our thinking and feeling and out pressing, and she just is connecting with that divine. She knows that he's got this connection to spirit, to intuition, and she just knows if she can catch it, she can be healed. And that's us, to be healed of that disease through our divine connection. And Jairus' daughter is supposedly dead, but is not dead. And he says, rise. Do not fear, only believe. And he takes with him Peter, James, and John, who symbolize faith, wisdom, and love. These empower faith, wisdom, and love. We have to look at our faith. We have to draw forth divine wisdom and act in divine love, the Christ within. And again, she was 12 years of age, so she was the same age. She was ready to be healed. Give her something to eat. She was grounded in that realization of health and wholeness. And so we bring that spiritual divine ideas into our minds. That was what we're focusing on today. To eliminate the negativity and to accept the positivity. That I am complete and healed and whole, shining in the reflection of God's love. I am complete and healed and whole, shining in the reflection of God's love. Happy, healthy, whole, and free, just as God created me to be. Thank you, God, and so it is. Amen. Yea, God.